Hello, this is Joe Polish, president of Piranha Marketing and founder of the Genius Network interview series, and you're about to hear one of my Genius Network interviews, and I just want to thank you for taking the time to listen to this, and I hope you find it very useful. If you want to find out more information about some of the interviews and resources that can help you in your business, you can go to www.joepolish.com. And we have a Joe Polish Recommends section with all kinds of resources and vendors and services and products that we recommend that can help you in your business. And also for more useful interviews and a whole list of other people that I've interviewed, you can go to www.geniusnetwork.com. Thanks and enjoy the interview.
Hello, this is Joe Polish with Genius Network. Welcome to my interview with my good friend, Mr. David Bach. Let me tell you a little bit about David. David Bach has helped millions of people around the world take action to live and finish rich. He's one of the most prolific financial authors of our time, with 10 consecutive national bestsellers, including 2 #1 New York Times bestsellers, Start Late, Finish Rich, and The Automatic Millionaire. In all, his Finish Rich books have been published in more than 15 languages with more than 7 million copies in print worldwide. David Bach's primary mission and passion today is to get America out of debt. To this end, he's just completed his 12th book, Debt Free for Life. And David Bach is also launching a debt-free challenge, financial literacy campaign with a goal to inspire 1 million Americans to pay off $1 billion in debt in the next year. Bach appears regularly in the national media. He's been on Oprah Winfrey many, many times, including a segment called the Debt Diet Series. And each week, David Bach appears as a contributor to NBC's Today Show, Money 9/11 segment, where he answers America's money questions. David Bach is also involved with many worthwhile causes, including Habitat for Humanity, New York City, where he is a board member, and in consideration of all his past and present success, what he's most proud of is his son, Jack Davis Bach, and his 11-month-old son, James Philip Bach. So, David, there's a heck of a lot of stuff that you do that I haven't mentioned here. So first, thank you for doing the interview. It's always fun to interview you. But what else are you up to? I mean, you're everywhere. You're probably the top financial author in the world today. So what else did I leave out?
Well, first of all, Joe, it's just great to be back on a call with you. And you're my first official interview for the new book, Debt Free for Life, and I couldn't be more excited to talk to you. It's kind of scary as I sit here and got ready for this call today, because I realize, you and I have known each other now since, I think, 1997. So we were just young kids there, and geez,
yeah.
I guess now we have a little bit more gray hair, or a little less hair, either one. But it's great to be with you, and I'm just extremely excited. As you know, when you and I met, I was a financial advisor. I spent nearly a decade at Morgan Stanley as a financial advisor and helping people plan for retirement. And when you and I first met, I don't even think I had a book out. And so it's really been a journey where, from being a financial advisor, I wrote my first book, Smart Women Finish Rich, and that book became a literacy program throughout North America, where we ultimately have educated millions of people through our Finish Rich seminars and now our books. And so what I've done for the last over a decade now is really try to help people throughout America and Canada, and now it's gone all over the world, be smarter with their money. And for better or for worse, in the last couple years, my primary focus has been helping people get out of debt, and that's been because America is just drowning in debt today. Whether it's credit card debt or mortgage debt, student loans. Every single day, my office gets emails and letters and requests for help on what do I do. And, even the money not you asked about the Today Show episode, but, I do this weekly series on the Today Show. We do it every Wednesday called Money 911. And 2 years ago, we would take investment questions. And, again, for better or for worse, now I would tell you 70, 80% of the questions we take every single week are related to debt. So that's really what's led me to not only write Debt Free for Life, but create the most comprehensive plan I've ever had to help Americans really wrap their arms around their debt and pay it off once and for all.
Awesome. Okay, well, I think the very best place to start is with the title of your book, Debt Free for Life. I imagine people listening to this, the question is, is that really possible? So, my question to you is, how much of this is a reality versus a book title?
It's a great question. It's like, once upon a time when I was sitting on a stage with Oprah Winfrey and I put out the book, The Automatic Millionaire, and you and I did an interview on that book.
Yeah.
Oprah turned to me and she said, "David, the automatic millionaire, it's a really big promise. Can anybody become an automatic millionaire?" And I remember looking at Oprah and looking at the audience and saying, "No, but not everybody can become an automatic millionaire. So first of all, you have to want to, and then second of all, you have to do what people do who have already become, millionaires. There's a strategy that I've learned from people who become millionaires that you have to implement, and that original book, The Automatic Millionaire, which has gone all over the world, it's probably the book I'm most well known for. The premise of that book was you have to pay yourself first, and you have to do it automatically. And to go from that message to today, what I'm really now teaching people is the same thing. Not everybody can be debt-free for life, but if you really want it, if you really have a desire to say, I don't want to have debt anymore in my life, because if I don't have any debt, I'll have more freedom. If you want to be debt-free, if you make that your primary mission, and that's what I think most Americans today should do, if you want it, I've got the tools for you. And just like I've taught Americans to pay themselves first automatically, I am now teaching Americans to pay down their debt automatically. And it is doable, and we get letters literally every single day from people who are reaching what we call their debt freedom day. It is a day in which you wake up and you have no more debt. You've paid all your debt off. You've paid your credit cards off. You've paid your student loans off. You've paid your mortgages off. And it's happening. And in fact, the exciting thing about right now, Joe, is that there's a movement across America. Since the recession, Americans have woken up to the disaster of debt, and Americans actually are making progress paying down their debt. In fact, Americans have paid off almost $200 billion worth of credit card debt in the last 24 months. So Americans are doing it, but I want to help people who are listening today do it faster and do it for life. So it's not just like a diet where you lose weight and then you put the weight back on. You pay off your debt, and then you stay out of debt for the rest of your life.
I love it. Yeah, and I remember when I was starting a business, I actually, in my worst stage in credit card debt, there was more than just credit card, but just in credit card debt, I owed over $30,000. And that's kind of how I kind of funded my business in the very beginning. And, like you do a great job of explaining, one of the reasons, there's many reasons to get out of debt that you talk about in Debt Free for Life. But one of them is just simply the ability to feel free, like you're not renting your life anymore. You actually own it. And I remember that day that I paid off everything finally, and it's an incredible liberating feeling. And so I know that's one of your objectives, and I know that it makes you very happy to hear all the success stories, and you share a lot of them in the book. And that's my goal and objective with talking with you today. Is
well, Joe, it's liberating. But the other thing is, I'm sure you can remember like it was yesterday, because I've been in debt too. I was in credit card debt in college, and I can remember like it was yesterday, even though it was over 22 years ago. I can remember like it was yesterday, that just deep-seated pain inside of me when I would open up those credit card statements. I remember the fear of, oh my God, how am I going to pay these bills? And that fear is almost paralyzing. And for many people, that fear right now is destroying their lives. I mean, I'm sure even you can remember what it was like to have that debt and how overwhelming that was.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely, and it's one of my driving forces to make sure I don't go back to that place. And so, what I want to do, because the book is really, really awesome. I'm going to encourage everyone to actually buy the book. It's a companion to this interview. It will assist you, and at the same time, I want this interview to be a standalone, and I want to give all of the listeners something that literally could be worth, six figures, 100,000 or more to them. It won't apply to everybody, but I think for most it will. And you even have it on page 124 in your book. It's one strategy that people can apply. So I'd like to have you just share a couple of tips that would be just worth thousands of dollars to everyone listening if they use them.
Yeah, I would love to, and maybe even millions of dollars. So one thing I love when I do interviews with you is I know that you actually apply some of my suggestions.
Oh, totally.
So, I know when and I'm just going to backtrack for a second, but I remember years ago when you interviewed me and you asked me this question, I said, as a business owner, the single most important decision that you can make as a business owner, do you remember what it was?
Buy my building? Yep.
I said the most important decision you can make as a business owner is to buy the real estate that your business is in, because most business owners never really build a net worth. But if you buy a building or piece of real estate for your business, 10 years later, you'll own the building, and the building could potentially be worth even more than your business. Remember that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And you did, right?
I've got a beautiful building worth, $1.5 million at least, probably more, and it's awesome.
And would you say that was one of the best financial decisions of your life?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so I'm going to give you what will be the second best financial decision of your life, and anybody who's listening can use this. I'll give it to you in two different ways. But, when you and I did that interview, I also bought a piece of commercial real estate. And I will tell you that the single most important decision that I made after I bought that piece of commercial real estate is that I have been paying my mortgage off faster than the bank wants me to. So when you ask me what's the secret to, and this is a secret out of the book, and you gave the page number, there's a section in Debt Free for Life where I teach you specifically how to pay your mortgages off faster than the bank wants you to. And that's really the key. The key to becoming debt-free for life and building wealth faster is not playing the game that the lending institutions want you to play. The ultimate business in the world to be in is to be a bank. And anybody who's listening knows that that's true. Look who got bailed out in the recession. It was the banks. It's the ultimate business to be in. And when people go to borrow money from a bank, the bank really doesn't want you to pay those loans off early. They would love you to get a 30-year mortgage and pay it over 30 years. Or they would love you to get a commercial mortgage and pay that off over 10 or 15 or 20 years. They want you to borrow money for as long as possible, because when you do that, they make a fortune and you work for the rest of your life. And look, we need the banks. We need them to loan us money. But we don't have to pay a loan off at the length of time that they want us to. So here's something that every single person who's listening can do and should do. And my guess is for the average person listening, this one tip will save them $50,000 to $100,000 over the life of their mortgages. Okay, so I'll give you an example here. This is straight out of the book on page 128. I use an example of a 30-year mortgage. If a person has a 30-year mortgage today and they have a low interest rate, their monthly payment is going to be about $1,800 a month. That assumes a 6% rate, 6% on their mortgage. Now, if they pay that over 30 years, that mortgage is going to cost them, just in interest payments, the interest on that mortgage is going to cost them $347,000. So the mortgage was actually $300,000, but it cost them over almost $650,000 to pay that mortgage off. Now, if you just did this one simple thing, if you did what's called a biweekly mortgage, where you, instead of paying your mortgage once a month, which is what most people do, you split your mortgage payment in half. You actually called back the bank and said, hey, I heard about this biweekly mortgage payment plan. Can you take my payment, split it in half? I'll pay half every 2 weeks. You take that 30-year mortgage I was just discussing, and instead of paying it in 30 years, you'll have it paid off completely in about 24 years. So you'll pay that mortgage off 6 years sooner. Now, in that example that I just gave you, this person who had a $300,000 mortgage would save $72,000.
Yep, pretty good.
I mean, incredibly, incredibly simple. So what's happening is a lot of people who look at that go, well, geez, you know what? I don't understand. Why am I paying it off 6 years early and saving nearly $100,000? Because with a biweekly payment plan, you are in fact making one extra payment a year. So just one extra payment a year pays a mortgage off at least 6 years sooner. In some cases, it's 7 to 8 years sooner, depending on the kind of mortgage that you have. Another idea that I have, and let me just give you, here's a story from somebody who actually, I'm doing an interview with them tomorrow for AOL. Okay, this is an email we got from a gentleman named Mark Bauscher. Mark said, David, I took your advice. Taking your advice on paying down my principal early, I've set up my mortgage payment automatically. I'm submitting 2 full extra payments a year. At this rate, my home will be paid off in 12 years versus 30 years. I will save tens of thousands of dollars in interest, not to mention the house now is a rental. It's bringing in positive cash flow. I'll be able to retire by the age of 43. With all the leisure time in the world to enjoy life and pursue other business and investment opportunities, best of all, I will have no mortgage. How awesome is that?
That is, yeah, it's absolutely awesome. And I mean, how many people would love to experience that sort of situation?
So what I would tell you, like on your commercial mortgage, for example, I don't know what your payments are, but one of the things you should do on your commercial mortgage is you should chunk it down every single year. And the best way to do that is automatically. It's to have money every single month automatically, extra payments added towards your mortgage. And I've done that on my commercial property. I've paid off almost 7 figures on my mortgage earlier than was supposed to be done. And one of the beauties of that is that if you ever decide you want to rent your property will cash flow. In many cases, you probably could retire off just the rental income of your property once you've got your mortgage paid off.
Yeah, totally. And I've many friends that actually do that. And I've had a tenant in only one tenant in my building. I have an 11,000 square foot building who has pays approximately $6,000 a month, every month for going on almost 5 years now.
Yeah, and you know what? And like same thing with me. I have a tenant in my property, and my tenant covers all my overhead and my mortgage and my principal and my insurance payments and my taxes. Yep. So I'm actually in the property for free.
Yeah, which is super cool. Now, okay, so first off, that's a fantastic suggestion. Talk a little bit about what if you went from a 30-year mortgage to like a 15-year. What would that same sort of loan look like?
Okay, so I talk about that. Let me just say something. I have never, for years, I've not been a proponent of 15-year mortgages, and that's because it's the cash flow for many people is very difficult to do. Today, with rates as low as they are, I have become a huge proponent of 15-year mortgages. I think in the next 15, and many people today, Joe, are switching to 15-year mortgages. In fact, again, this movement to get out of debt, Americans are actually refinancing their home. They're putting money into their mortgage versus taking money out for the first time in decades. And I'm getting emailed and asked this question every day, should I switch to a 15-year mortgage? And I will tell you, I think for the average person listening, if you switch to a 15-year mortgage right now and you can make those mortgage payments, you will look back and on that decision being your best financial decision of your lifetime. Because if you're listening today, if you switch to it, and here's the $300,000 example. This is on page 125 of Debt Free for Life. You take that same mortgage for $300,000. Your payments go from $1,800 a month to $2,500 a month. Now that's not a little bit of money. You're talking about an extra $700 a month. But you know what? If you work hard, you can probably find that extra $700 a month. So instead of increasing your lifestyle, you really buckle down. That person's going to pay that mortgage off in 15 years. That mortgage is going to be, the total cost of that mortgage is going to be $455,000 versus a 30-year mortgage plan. That person's going to save in a 15-year mortgage nearly $200,000 by doing a 15-year mortgage versus a 30-year. And again, even, I'm a huge believer in investing, but if you said to me today, going out 15 years, what's the best investment you can make in the next 15 years? Is it the stock market? Is it real estate? Is it gold? Is it silver? I'd say, Joe, the best decision is pay your debt down faster. Yeah. And imagine being 15 years from now having no debt. How great would that feel? A lot of people who listen to your programs and will be listening to this audio, especially people who come to my website, we know the average age is somewhere between 30 to 50. Well, if you're in your 30s right now and you do a 15-year mortgage, you'd be debt-free by 45. Even somebody's in their 40s, they'd be debt-free by 55. 50s, you'd be debt-free by 65. So I think it's a fantastic decision to make. And again, these are the lowest rates we've seen in our lifetime. Probably never going to be this low again in our lifetime. So I'd take advantage of it.
Gotcha. Okay, great. So what about... and you write about this in the book, good debt versus bad debt. What are your thoughts on that now? What is the difference between these terms people throw around, good debt and bad debt, and what are your thoughts on it?
Well, in the old days, and that wasn't too long ago, before the recession, the belief was good debt can make you rich. And I've even been somebody who said this. Good debt is money you borrow to build assets. So it could be money you're borrowing to buy real estate, which I believe in. It could be money you're borrowing to go back to school, which I believe in. And then bad debt would be, the type of debt where you're borrowing money to buy something that depreciates immediately. So pretty much anything that you put on your credit card is almost always bad debt. When you're borrowing money to buy anything that's going to go down in value, borrowing money to buy a car that's going to drop in value the moment you drive it off the lot, that's been considered bad debt. But what I'm telling people today is that this idea that there's good debt and bad debt, it's really sort of a myth. I think that we've been misled. I think the truth is that what we have today is that debt is just debt. And if you've got more debt than you can afford to pay off, it's all bad debt. And really, if you look at your debt as it's sort of all bad, and in a perfect world you just wouldn't have any of it, then that's my philosophy today. My philosophy is pay your debt down faster. It's not just about the interest rate anymore. You know, people say to me, well, geez, my mortgage is only 5%. Does it really make sense to pay it off since the rate's so low? Absolutely, because guess what? You're still paying the interest. Money in a checking account or a money market account right now is earning less than 1%. Even if you've got a loan at 3 or 4 or 5%, I still think you're better off to pay off your debt. And ultimately, debt is the one thing that can drown you. When you look at all the millions of homes being foreclosed on, somebody the other day said, you know, I've never seen a home foreclosed on that didn't have debt. Yeah. So in other words, everybody who's losing their homes, they're losing it because they had debt. If they didn't have debt, you can't lose your house.
Good point. So, well, okay, so why today is getting out of debt even more important than, say, it was 5 years ago, or is it?
I think today getting out of debt is more important than it's been, is as important as it's been since the Great Depression. So if you go back to the Great Depression, you know, when my grandmother lived through the Great Depression, the truth was the Great Depression, for a generation, it really did it scarred, but it shaped a generation of people. You know, my grandmother always paid for everything in cash. Back in her day, people, when they took out mortgages, they used to have mortgage burning parties. People would buy homes, and they would, you know, all strive to pay their homes off, and then they'd literally throw a party when they could, you know, burn the mortgages. Well, what happened over time is it became easier and easier to borrow money, and you look at what's gone through with, you know, the subprime meltdown that we lived through and the recession. Debt has become something that it was okay to have lots and lots of debt, because as the economy was roaring, everybody felt like, well, you know what, I can make the payments, and my house is going to appreciate, and, you know, even if I run up my credit cards, I can borrow the money out to pay off those credit cards. And then we went through a recession, and home values dropped in price, and people have pulled all their equities out of their home, and now our country is living through, you know, a very, very difficult time financially because of so much debt. So I think what's happening is we are really, as a country, going back to the basics. And those basics that built this country, those basics that came after the Great Depression, were, if you can't afford to buy it, don't buy it. Right. Save to pay for it. And if you have debt, pay your debt off sooner. You know, our grandparents and our parents really didn't have a difficult time retiring. One of the reasons they didn't have a difficult time retiring is they paid all their debt off. Our generation, however, is going to have a harder time retiring. And I think as I do, you know, really lifestyle planning for people today when it comes to their money, what I'm sharing is if you want to reach a point where you won't have to work for the rest of your life, where you don't have to be dependent on Social Security or Medicaid or Medicare or our government fixing the deficit, if you don't want to be dependent on outside sources, if you want to be in charge of your future and in charge of your own life, the best way to do it is to pay your debt off. It's the ultimate form of financial freedom. It's not how much money you accumulate. It's not how big your brokerage account is. The faster you have your debt paid off, the less money you need for the future for savings.
Yeah, you make a comment in the book that where you say it's not how much you make that will determine whether or not you become wealthy. It's how much you spend.
I know, and you know, I've talked about this for years. I mean, I've become known for the Latte Factor, where I teach people, you know, the wasting of $5 to $10 a day. If you saved that money and instead used it to pay yourself first or pay your debt down, you could become wealthy. It hasn't changed, and you know, every day we see people who have made a lot of money and they're still broke. I was just interviewed yesterday, and one of the questions I was asked about Michael Jackson, of all people. And the question I was asked is, you know, did I think, you know, that the financial pressure of what he had gone through is what actually killed him? And he's such a sad example of this because he's such a talented man and he had such a huge impact on the world. But when you think of Michael Jackson, and here's an example of somebody who made, you know, I've read reports that he over his lifetime, I think the earnings were over $1 billion. He still had to keep working. You know, he was about to go do a 50 tours. 50 tours to pay off the debt that he had and sustain his lifestyle. And it's arguable that the pressure of having to gear up for 50 events is what ultimately killed him. And I was talking about this with somebody yesterday. I said, it just goes to show you it doesn't matter what you earn. If you're always outspending your earnings, the pressure never goes away. And on the flip side of that, every single day I meet people who've had ordinary incomes, and they have no debt, and they're living an extraordinary lifestyle. I was just in Deer Valley, actually, yesterday, which was amazing. The snow in Deer Valley was incredible. And on this lift, I was with a teacher who had just retired and had worked for 38 years, an ordinary income, and was retired in her mid-50s, and basically spends the whole winter going from resort to resort skiing. And she said to me, oh, my God, I'm just like the people you talk about in your book. I paid myself first. I paid off my debt. I don't need a lot of money today, but on a very ordinary income now, I have this extraordinary lifestyle. And so it's not what you make, it's what you save, and it's how fast you pay off your debt.
Yeah, and you know what, I'm gonna ask you some questions about credit card debt and 401ks in just a moment, but I wanna first ask you about a concept you have, which applies to all of it, which is your Dolf system, DOLP, which you used to call debt on last payment, but now you call it done on last payment. Explain what that is and how the listeners can use it.
Yeah, you bet. Well, what I've learned over time is that people don't know how to pay their debt off. So someone who's listening might say, this sounds great, but I've got a lot of debt. I don't even know where to start, David. And when I do these money makeovers for TV shows, usually when we sit down with people, they've got 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 credit cards. They may have a mortgage, a home equity loan, a student loan, a car loan. They don't know where to start. And so when you don't know where to start, you simply never get started.
Right.
It's really obvious. But it's like people don't know where the button is to push. If people just had a little red button on their desk and it was like start here, the start here button, people would go and push the button, but they don't know how to start. So what I created was a system for people, a formula to stack their debt and show them the order in which to pay their debt off themselves. And that is at the essence what done on last payment does. Dolp is a system I've taught for well over a decade, which was, very old school manual. You basically list all of your debt, and then in the book there's a mathematical formula by which you determine which debt should be paid off first. And so you make minimum payments on all your debt, and you apply all the extra money to the number one priority debt. And it's a very simple stacking system. And yet the reason this system has been so successful for, thousands and thousands of people is that it's easy. They can see it in black and white. I did it on the Oprah Winfrey Show when we did the Debt Free for Life series. It was, we literally had a big, huge board. We had a Dolp board where the family had 12 credit cards, and they listed it on their Dolp board, and they put their Dolp board in their kitchen, and they focused on it, and they looked at it every single day. And as they started paying off their credit cards, they would put a big check mark by it. And people saw that visually on that show, but people have read this in my books. And, the longer that it's been out there, the more success stories we have. So I think what's happened now, it's like because we've been doing this for, over a decade, and we have so many people who write in and say, oh, my God, I used your Dolp system. I paid off. I just got a letter yesterday or 2 days ago here because I've got to go prepare for this show tomorrow. So I've got this huge stack of success letters. And there's a woman tomorrow that's getting on this Skype call with me. I'm just flipping through these letters here, and she saved $72,000. She paid off $72,000 in debt using the Dolp formula. And here's what's so cool about this email she sent me. Because she's been doing this since 2005, she was able to send me what her balance was in 2005, 2006. She sent me 5 years of her Dolp worksheet. And so here's somebody who had all this debt, never knew how to pay their debt down, and by simply using this Dolp formula, knows exactly how much debt she's paid off and has paid off over $72,000 of the credit card debt.
Yeah, pretty awesome. And this is a pretty simple thing to do if people know how to do it. You completely not only outline it in the book, but all of the forms, the fill in the blank, everything is there. So pretty much for a tiny fee, people have the process right there.
Yeah, it's right there, and then we've also created a form online that people can use for free. It's again the beauty. I always tell people the beauty of money is that you don't need to know trig or geometry or calculus. If you can count to 100 and you know how to do basic multiplication or division, you can get wealthy and you can pay off your debt. And the Dolf formula is so simple you could teach this to an 8th grader. And I'm sure that there have been 8th graders that have probably sat down with their parents and taught this to their parents.
Why do you think? I mean, is it ignorance? Is it denial? I mean, why? I mean, like you mentioned, even using yourself as an example in college when you had credit card debt. You know, buying things you don't need with money you don't have. And so many Americans, so many people, you know, worldwide fall into that trap. I mean, there's many reasons for it, but what are the top ones that you have encountered, having, you know, honestly coached millions of people?
Well, first of all, I think that most of us are financially illiterate. I mean, I think the average person is financially illiterate in the fact that, you know, if we are not taught about money in school. So, you know, and if we are, it's really, really basic things like like how to write a check or balance a checkbook. I think that the core issue for people is that they're not raised around money. You know, their family doesn't teach them about money at home. It's not taught in schools. I was actually very fortunate that my father was a financial advisor and my grandmother was a self-made millionaire, so I learned a lot of lessons from them. But for the most part, you know, we learn our lessons through trial and error. And that's number one. Number two is that we are marketed to by all the machines that are out there to spend more than we have and borrow more than we have. And if you look at how I got myself into credit card debt in college, it was pretty simple. I was stupid. You know, I checked in at USC where I went to college. I got my student ID, walked into the dorms, and right after I got my student ID, there were 3 tables lined up next to the student ID person. And they were handing out bike locks and clock radios and dictionary, and all 3 were offering credit cards after you signed a form. And so you turn around, and a week later, you're a freshman in the dorms, you're 18, and you're dumb, and you've got 3 new credit cards, and the whole dorm was like that. So, you know, before you know it, you're even though I told myself I wouldn't use those credit cards in case of emergency, I started using them. That's how I got myself into debt. But, you know, today a lot of people aren't in debt because they are just stupid. They're like I was myself in college. They are in debt because, you know, maybe they've lost their job and now they're having to use their credit cards to pay for food. I mean, not everybody in America is in debt because they've just gone out and foolishly spent money. There are a lot of people in this country suffering because they're simply not working or they're not making enough money. And I really recognize that. I see the pain as I go across America. You know, people are in debt because they have medical loans and they don't have health insurance. So it's not just that people are spending money frivolously, but I do believe that the system is rigged to keep us broke. I do believe that the credit card companies have taken a huge advantage of the average American. You know, they've taken advantage of us from the interest rates. They've taken advantage of us from the annual fees and the late fees. They've made billions and billions of dollars off of our ignorance. And I think that a lot of the lending institutions have just not done us right as Americans. And a lot of millions of Americans find themselves today drowning in debt that they can't afford to pay back when probably they shouldn't have been allowed to borrow the money in the first place. So, you know, I really believe in personal responsibility, but I also really believe that we have been misled and taken advantage of. And I think that we're living through a time now where people are standing up for themselves and saying, you know, enough is enough. There was an article, in fact, and I know I talk too much here, Joe. You can cut me off at any time. But there was an article today in the New York Times, yesterday, in the New York Times, front page article in the New York Times yesterday, talking about how credit card companies are revamping up again, sending out credit card applications to people who have gone bankrupt, to people who have been in debt. And the first person, and one of the people interviewed in this article said, you know, she's got $17,000 of credit card debt. She finally paid her credit cards off, and in 1 week she got 3 credit card offers.
Wow.
And so, you know, the industry that got us into debt is just waiting on the sidelines for us to pay off our debt and then suck us right back in. And so, you know, when you look at the book Debt Free for Life, what I really want people to focus on is not just getting out of debt once, but getting out of debt for life. It's staying with that mind frame that once I get out, I never want to get back in again.
Yeah, which is a great goal and a great objective. Well, you know, since you mentioned it about the credit card company sending this individual, 3 offers the moment that they, you know, had her name available as having paid off debt, what are some of the secrets that credit card companies don't want the listeners to know? Because they're pretty savvy in their abilities to, get people into the debt spiral.
Well, they really are, and I've rallied against the credit card industry, I have to say, for years. I've always been afraid that maybe they would come get me, but they haven't, so I'm thankful for that. But, all I've really done, and I've done this on TV shows, and I did a PBS special on this, is all I've done is just highlight what the credit card companies are allowed to do legally. And, what have they been allowed to do legally? What they've been allowed to do legally is raise your interest rates at any time. They've been allowed to suck you in with 0% interest rate credit cards, and then if you're late one time, jack your rate up to 20%, and if you're late two times, jack it up to 25%. Sometimes they can jack it up all the way to 29.99%. They've been allowed to do what's called a universal default clause, where if you're late on one bill, has nothing to do with them, they still have a right to raise your interest rates. They've been allowed to have, over-the-limit fees that can be as high as $50 a month. So if you go over your limit by $1, they can charge you $50 every time you go over the limit. They've, obviously been allowed to have huge annual fees that can be as much as $100 a year just to have the right to the credit card. And you hear me saying they've been allowed to. Let me just say something. They've been allowed to lower the minimum payments to a rate that is so low that if you only make minimum payments, it'll take you over 50 years to get out of your credit card debt. So that's what they've been allowed to do. Now, things have seriously changed a lot. The Credit Card Act that was passed last year, which I feature in Debt Free for Life, has changed a lot of the games that the credit card companies have been allowed to play. But what the credit card companies have done as a result of the Credit Card Act is they've actually made it harder for most consumers now because they can't get away with a lot of the things that they were able to do legally before. They've now come up with new ways to suck the money out of our pockets. So one of the things the credit card companies have done is before the act was put into force, they went around and they raised everyone's credit card rates. I mean, you can't say everyone. They raised a lot of their customers. Millions of customers have had their credit card interest rates raised. And many customers who have never been late on a credit card have had their rates now raised to as high as 29%. So one of the things the credit card companies don't want you to know is that if you've got a really high interest rate right now, there are ways in which you can get that rate lowered. And I go through in Debt Free for Life the actual scripts that you can use and the things that you can say to negotiate those rates lower. And I've got all these success stories of people who go, wow, I can't believe it, David, but the stuff actually worked. I actually did call the credit card company, and I did get them to lower my rates. And I go through in this new book, Debt Free for Life, how it's getting harder because not everybody's they're really fighting all these techniques that we've been teaching to lower your rates, but it's still doable. In fact, I'm interviewing again for this AOL thing tomorrow a woman named Bev who I'm reading her story right out of the book, but she goes through this and she says, she had a card that was paying 25%. The first person she spoke to, she got the rate lowered to 13.9. And she says, wow, I started getting courageous, so I asked for a lower rate, and by asking again, they lowered it to 10%. So here's a person that was paying 25% interest, and with one phone call got the rate down to 10%. She was also able to get a $120 annual fee removed. She was able to switch one of her credit cards by using some of my techniques to 11.5%. And we've had people use some of the techniques in this book and get the rates down to 0%. So much of it is obviously the credit card companies are not going to go out advertising this. But in Debt Free for Life, I go through a couple programs that the credit card companies have, but they do not promote or actively go around sharing that can help you if you're drowning in credit card debt today. Get your rates lowered. In some cases, down to below 10%. In some cases, you can get the rates completely taken away down to 0% if you enter into a couple of these plans I discuss in the book.
Yeah, and you know what amazes me about simply, motivating people to make these phone calls and asking for it. One of the key things in life is knowing who to ask and knowing what to ask them. This applies, I cannot tell you how many times in the last 20 years I've had situations where you're in a competitive industry, not only credit cards, but you call like a cable company or you call your phone company and you talk to them about, what are the rates? Am I in the best plan? If I'm thinking about switching to this other company and then all of a sudden they want your business. If they do want your business, they make you a counteroffer and it typically involves less money. And so I think if people do what you say to do in the book, I'd be hard-pressed to find, they may not get it down to zero, but they're certainly going to do things which are going to leave all of our listeners in a much better financial place. And you don't need to figure out what to ask because you've laid it all out in Debt Free for Life. So,
and let me just say this, because that's exactly right. And I just also want people to know, if you really got a huge problem on your hands where this is not just about negotiating rates for it, but you really are having a hard time just making payments, there are programs that the credit card companies, again, offer up today. They don't actively promote it. In fact, sometimes if you call them, they'll say they don't even know what you're talking about. But I'll give you an example. There's a program called a Forbearance Plan. So I spoke about this recently on a show where if you call the credit card companies directly, if you are really in trouble financially, the credit card companies have direct programs called Forbearance Plans, where they will, in some cases, lower your rate to 0%. On average, right now, it's somewhere between 5 to 10%. They'll stop the over-the-limit fees, they'll waive the annual fees, they'll put you on a program to pay that card off. Now, they'll freeze the card so you can't continue to use that card anymore, but by going into one of these programs, you'll at least get the debt paid off, and then you can start over again. Well, I had somebody recently say to me, well, you know what, I called up, and they said they didn't know what I was talking about. Well, the company that they called up and said they didn't know what I was talking about, I said, I don't know how that's possible, but you need to call again, because I can tell you for a fact that company right now today, and I won't say who it is, but it's in the book, that company today has 1.6 million customers enrolled in this exact type of plan that I've laid out in the book. And how do I know that? I interviewed the company, and they put out a press release on it. So, I mean, these are the kind of things that people go, there's no way, this can't possibly be true. And it's like, no, it's true. They just don't want to promote these things.
Right, exactly. Well, talk about the minimum payment scam.
Yeah, well, so earlier I was saying how that, I've been rallying on this, Joe, for 10 years. For 10 years I've been saying, how can the credit card companies legally get away with taking, let's say you've got $10,000 in debt. What the credit card companies did is they made your minimum payment so low, like let's say it's like $50 a month. They made it so low that with interest payments, it literally will take you over 50 years to pay off that credit card. And believe it or not, there are millions of Americans that just focus in on the minimum payment every month, and that's what they pay. And that's what they want you to do. Well, finally, with the new Credit Card Act now, the credit card statement has to tell you that. It has to show you in black and white that if you make this minimum payment, this is how many years it's going to take you to pay off the credit card. What they don't show you, though, is what if you just doubled the minimum payment? In most cases, if you double the minimum payment on a credit card, you'll pay that credit card off in less than 3.5 years. That's the math that they should show you on the credit card statement. The other thing is the minimum payment is adjusted every single month because as you pay your credit card off or you're paying it down a little bit, that monthly payment actually keeps shrinking. So again, for most people, they look at the statement and they go, well, geez, I'm doing the right thing. I'm making my payment. That's what the statement says. It says right here, pay this amount. But the truth is that you never want to pay that amount. You have, like, let's say your minimum payment's $50 this month. You should pay $100. And then next month, if the minimum payment instead of being $50 is $47, instead of doubling that $47 amount, you should still pay $100. Because what you're doing is you're ratcheting down the debt faster and faster and faster. And that is really, people have talked about the miracle of compound interest. In Debt Free for Life, I go through, this is the miracle of compound interest in reverse. And if you apply it towards your debt, there are a lot of people listening, if they took the Debt Free for Life book and they truly applied what's in the book, they could be out of debt in less than 5 years. Everything.
Yeah. So, well, you have a great chapter, which is it's about the debt free for life mindset, and you take people through a list of questions, which really, kind of causes them to tell the truth about their situation. And you also have a term called debt denial. So I'd like you to first define what debt denial is, and then talk about mindset, because I think these are critical for anyone to take on what we're talking about.
Yeah, well, you bet. I mean, I've always been a big believer in the best way for people to learn. The best way to get someone to make a decision is not to tell them go do this; it's to get them to ask themselves a question. So what I did in Debt Free for Life is I laid out 7 questions to help you get into the right mindset to get yourself out of debt. And they're super simple questions, but they're big, important questions. So I'll just give you an example of these. And before I do, I'll kind of answer, let me answer your question about debt denial. People say to me every day, I want to be out of debt, David, but, I don't know where to start. And I'll always ask the question, well, how much debt do you have? And either they'll say, well, I don't really know, or they'll give me a ballpark number. Well, here's what I mean by debt denial. In almost every single case, if we do a real money makeover, like for a TV show, whatever they tell us they have in debt is never close to how much debt they have. I have unfortunately been brought in to do TV shows, and Oprah was an example of this, where I'm the pre-interview is done, and I'm prepped to go in and do the makeover, and I'm told, for instance, the couple's got $40,000 in debt, and when I get over to their house and I really go through their debt, they've got $80,000 in debt. And this happened to me on so many occasions, and I'm like, how does this happen that people have so much more debt than they think they have? And the answer is they've got debt denial. And today what happens is a lot of people, they don't even want to look at their debt. One of these people says, I don't even want to open my statements. Well, almost with this belief that if I can't see it, it's not real. When in fact, if you can't see it, you can't confront it. So again, in Debt Free for Life and the Dolf System, a lot of it is just confronting it. It's like, if you want to lose weight, I'm all for going out and exercising and eating right, but it's really good to know what your weight is today so you can tell if you're making progress. You got to stand on a scale and look down at your feet and confront the facts.
Yeah.
Last night I came home and got on the scale, and my fiance said to me, maybe you shouldn't get on the scale at the end of the day after you've been eating all day long. And I said, well, I still want to know, It's the same thing with your debt. If you really want to get your debt paid down, you got to step on that scale. You got to look down and confront it. So a lot of times, it just starts with just being honest. How much debt do we really have? And it's looking at all the debt again. It's going back and going, okay, well, here's how much mortgage debt I've got, and here's my student loans, and here's my car loan, and here's my credit card debt. And, maybe not all of it's killing us because some of it's low interest rates, but wow, that is a lot of debt. And it really would be nice to pay that down. And wait a minute, how long is it going to take it to pay it off? Oh, it's going to take 27 years? Well, geez, that kind of sucks. How can I pay that off sooner?
Right. Well, the whole thing, this might be a stretch to say this, although you give examples in the book. Being in debt and being in denial creates, and just not knowing leaves you in the dark, and that creates a tremendous amount of angst. And from broken marriages to just people living in constant fear to just the stress that goes along with it. If you get out of debt, all kinds of other benefits come with it, with the removal of that sort of pressure, and that can lead people to have all kinds of areas of improvement in their health, in their parenting, in their career, and in everything. And that's why, I don't want to minimize, the importance of this particular issue, and of course why you wrote an entire book totally devoted to this one particular subject. So, so share a little bit about mindset then, because if you don't have the right mindset, you're probably just not going to do it. And measurement is critical, as you've pointed out. If you're not measuring where you're at, you don't know. There's no way to know if you're winning the game or not.
Yeah, so, going to mindset, again, so much, this is I'm just going to actually flip the chapter. This is in chapter 3. It's on page 33. It's looking at, first of all, why do you want to be out of debt? Anybody who picks up Debt Free for Life, there's probably a part of them that's saying, I would love that. I would love to be debt free for life. Well, great. Why? Let's just start there and answer the question for yourself. I want to be debt, and I've got a question. The question starts with, why do you want to be debt free? I want to be debt free for life because. Well, what's your answer? And there is no right answer. The only answer that matters is your own. I asked this question to somebody in the book, and the person shared, I was raised by an alcoholic father. My family at one point was homeless. I remember living on the streets with my brother, and this is a person who was financially doing pretty well. But when he really drilled down on why he wanted to be debt-free, he said, I always want to know that, number one, I'll never be homeless again. And I'm just reading this from the book. He said, I want to know that I will never be homeless again, that my savings will always be safe, and that I won't need to be dependent on anybody. And then he went deeper. He said, I also want my 2 kids to always be safe from financial worry, and I would like to help them someday buy a home. And the sooner I pay down my mortgage, the sooner I feel like I could focus on building up a trust to help them someday buy their own home. And he went on saying how, helping his children someday own their own home would be the greatest gift he feels that he could give his children other than unconditional love. And part of what I talk about in the very beginning of the chapter is really getting clear with your own reason, answering your why this is important for you. Because the clearer you are and the bigger and the vision is, the brighter the vision is, the more you're going to really work towards that goal. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
You and I met at Strategic Coach. Remember that 3-year question, where you want to be 3 years from today. And I'm not saying that exactly right, but it's the same thing. It's having absolute clarity around why you really want this.
Yep. Yeah. If we're gonna, if people think about themselves 3 years from today, what needs to, as it relates to their debt, what needs to happen between now and then for them to feel happy with their progress, and if you can't answer that question, you're going to have a hard time knowing where you want to go.
Yeah, exactly, and that's exactly it. And that leads to question 2, which is, okay, well, let's be honest. Why are you in debt? So I've got a whole exercise you do on that. And then question number 3 is, well, how much debt do you have? Really specifically nailing that down. And question number 4 is one that I think really helps people get clarity, which is what percentage of your income is going to pay interest charges on your debt? And it's so important, I almost want to say it again. What percentage of your income is going to pay just interest charges on your debt? Because when people look at how much they're paying on their debt, what we're seeing right now is often a third of people's incomes are going towards debt repayment, but all it is interest payments. So every single month, a third of their paycheck is going towards paying off debt, but it's actually not making any progress whatsoever financially. They're just paying interest payments. So you need to know the percentage of your income that's just going towards interest so you can figure out what percentage needs to go towards principal. And then there's additional questions in here, like who can help you get out of debt? Asking yourself, what's the worst thing that could happen if you don't get started? And then I think question 7 is the single most important one, which is when are you going to get started? And we've got what we call the Debt Free for Life pledge in this book, where you make a pledge not just to yourself, but you can also make a pledge publicly. And we're actually having a contest with the promotion of this book where you can win $10,000 this year simply by taking the pledge. And they can do that by going to our website at finishrich.com, and there's a little link there that will take them over to the Debt Free for Life pledge.
Yep, I love it. We're going to talk more about that at the end, too, because I do want to recommend that people visit your website, and you do have a super cool tool, which I'll wait till the end to ask you about that. A couple things I want to ask you about. In the day and age of shrinking nest eggs and 401ks, many Americans these days wonder if they can ever retire. And I'd like you to explain why this is not true, because you talk about it in the book, and it kind of leads to the reality is debt-free for life really possible. So if you could maybe talk about that.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And this year I put out a book called Start Over, Finish Rich, where I predicted that following recessions come huge economic rebounds, and we're living through one right now. I mean. Less than 2 years ago, the market was in the Dow Jones Industrial Average was at 6,500, and now the Dow Jones today hit 11,500. I don't know where this will be when someone listens to this, but the economy is picking up, and the truth is that timeless principles work. Saving money, paying yourself first automatically, having a strong financial plan, and paying down your debt works. And so when people, there's a lot of noise out there today, and there's a lot of big things to be worried about. There's absolutely no doubt that this country has too big of a deficit. That's a real problem. There's also probably no doubt that we're not going to do anything about it in the next couple of years. So I think what I tell people is this: stop focusing on the news, okay?
Yeah.
The political sideshow that takes place in America, it's a lot of noise that you can't do anything about. It's just the truth. And what you can do something about, you can't do anything about the global economy. People come up to me and they're like, well, what do you think is going to happen to the euro? And, are you worried about what's going on in Greece and Portugal? Do you think Spain's going to, have a debt crisis? I'm like, who cares? Are you paying yourself first? Do you own any real estate? Are you paying off your debt? Let's just focus on you. So I think the most important economy that someone who's listening needs to work on is their own economy. And people make financial planning too complicated. It doesn't need to be complicated. It really comes down to doing a handful of things. And if you're going to focus on only a handful of things, one of those things to focus on is debt reduction. In fact, if you only had 3 things to focus on, it would be debt reduction. If you only had 2 things to focus on, it would be debt reduction. One would be pay yourself first, and the second would be debt reduction. So, I don't know where gold, silver, the stock market, the bond market, interest rates are going. Nobody really ever knows. What I know is this: if you've got debt today and you pay it off, you'll need less money going forward. What I know, having spent 9 years at Morgan Stanley as a senior vice president and having managed hundreds of millions of dollars and worked with retirees, is that my clients that paid their debt off, and that includes their home mortgage, people who paid their home mortgages off early, on average retired 10 years sooner. So when we had clients retire in their 50s, the common link among people in their 50s, the reason they could retire, was not how much money they had saved, it was the fact that they had no debt. So the less debt you have, the less money you need. And I do seriously, Joe, believe that if you have less debt, you have the potential to live longer. Because I think the pressure that debt creates on people's health and people's marriages can actually cause death. I think it can cause heart disease. I think it causes obesity and diabetes. And so, to me, your debt reduction is more than just, okay, you're paying off your credit cards or you're paying on your mortgage. It's about a lifestyle decision. And it's really about the ultimate decision to buy your freedom back. And you made a comment earlier about health, and then I'll shut up for a second. But, we get letters from people where once they start paying their debt off, they just start losing weight. We've got a story in this book here where I'm going to go back to the page here, but the woman who emailed me talks about how she saved over $6,000 in 6 months and she lost 21 pounds. And she said, David, you're a lifesaver more than one. Thank you for everything. And so we see that a lot, that when people fix their finances, they also fix their health. And their health, it's first you fix your finances, then you start to feel better, and then you're able to tackle your health issues.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's one of the things that our friend Dan Sullivan at Strategic Coach says, where, one of the reasons people die void of, accidents and diseases, which I think many diseases can be caused by stress, is, they just run out of money. And it's not a good place to be in, and we've all seen it. And, of course, both in our own ways, we're on a mission to help people avoid it, or we wouldn't even be having this conversation right now. And you wouldn't have been writing a book about it. You made a really interesting statement I want to highlight. It's even in the book. You said clients of ours who focus on paying off their debt were able to retire an average of 10 years earlier than those who didn't. And I think that's really something for people to think about, and the best way to get started is to get started. And you also say in the book that being debt-free for life should be your new financial goal. And I think that's a pretty important goal. And I think that kind of, sums up a lot of people's goal and wish, at least. And if you don't currently have that goal and you're listening to this, hopefully you adopt it and you use this system that you've put together in order to make that a reality. Let me ask you about credit score. I think how important is someone's credit score, and what are some tips to improve a credit score?
Your credit score is really important, Joe. It really is your we call it your financial GPA. It's probably more important today than it's been at any point in our lifetime, and that's because look, the banks have lost a lot of money on bad loans. They probably loaned money to a lot of people who didn't deserve to have the money loaned to them. But at the end of the day, investors who buy debt from the lending institutions want to buy debt that people are going to actually really be able to pay off. And so today, if you go to borrow money, the lending institutions, they care today more than they've ever cared about your credit score. And your credit score is pulled. This is really important for people to understand this. Your credit score is pulled based on the information in your credit report. I think today a lot of people don't even know that there's a difference between a credit report and a credit score. So let me just start with the credit report. When you went to school, you got grades, and your grades made up your GPA, and then your GPA is what allowed you to, helped you a lot in some cases where you went to school next or where you got a job. It's the same thing with your credit score. Your credit score is based off your credit report. Your credit report is pulled from 3 credit bureaus, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. They have all the information on you from basically the day you started borrowing money and paying it back. And so that information is what is used to build what is called a credit score. and it's built off of a mathematical formula. Nobody's ever really given away the true secrets to exactly how that formula is created, but we have a lot of insight into what goes into that credit score, and I can kind of give you some of that insight. But, rather than just dig deep into this because there's so much information in the book, let me give you some of the highlights or the high level look at this. The key about your credit score is to know that, first of all, you can raise your credit score significantly in a short period of time. Using the techniques in Debt Free for Life, we have seen people in the past raise their credit score 50 to 100 points, and many of them have done that in 6 months or less. And if your credit score today is horrible, I can tell you that you can still raise your credit score 50 to 100 points in a year if you do the right things. And we've seen people raise their credit scores over 150 points in a year. So I think the first thing to know is that no matter how bad your credit score is today, you can improve it. And in Debt Free for Life, we've got a 12-step plan on specifically how to do that, including starting with your credit report, actually going and pulling a free credit report. The credit bureaus have to give you a credit report. So we've given you the website in the book. It's annualcreditreport.com. But in the book, I go through how to get your free credit report and then how to get mistakes on your credit report fixed. Because your credit score, again, because it's based off your credit report, if there's errors in your credit report, it's garbage in, garbage out. And a lot of people today, when they pull their credit report, they're going to find there's errors on it. So the first thing to do, one of the fastest ways often to improve your credit score is to simply get errors on your credit report fixed.
Yeah, that seems, pretty, and again, you totally describe exactly how to do this in the book.
Yeah, and then what I've really gone through is, I went back and we interviewed everybody. So we interviewed the different credit bureaus, and we interviewed companies like Ferriss, and we did tons of research on this. We went through, there's 5 specific things that impact your credit score. They include your payment history, how much money you owe, the length of your credit history, new credit, and the type of credit used. Well, a lot of people don't know, what percentage of your score is based on these different things. So knowing exactly what goes in your credit score and what you can do quickly to improve it is really the key. And also, I don't want everybody here to feel like they've got to go out and buy my book. If you got time, I'll give you some tips out of this. I mean, a couple of things I will tell you that one of the fastest ways to make sure that your credit score goes higher is to automate your bill paying, so you never miss a deadline. Because one of the number one thing that lowers your credit score, aside from not paying your bills, is not paying your bills on time.
Right.
And so paying your bills on time, the key to that is to automate it so you pay those bills early. I give you a system on how to do that. It's also knowing how much debt you can have on each card. Many people today, when they pay off their credit cards, the question we're being asked is, should they pay those cards off? I mean, should they cancel those cards? And I go through actually in the book why today you don't want to close those cards, because if you close those cards today, you can actually lower your credit score. So unfortunately, there's sort of new games that you need to play today to keep your score where it is and actually get it to go higher. And a lot of this, things have changed. I mean, if you go back and you read a book of mine from 5 years ago, my advice on how to get your credit score up is different than it is today because the formulas have simply changed. The whole industry is different today than it was 5 to 10 years ago.
Yeah, which is why it's always important to just stay on the cutting edge. Which is why, of course, you keep writing books and giving people the latest and greatest advice. Well, in a nutshell, David, you've coached millions of people. You've got more than a bazillion success stories out there to validate that your system works. Why do you think your system actually works?
I think whether it's all the things I've taught, I think the reason it works is that the way I teach people take action. So, my goal has always been, I'm not here to be an entertainer. I'm here to educate you and get you to take action. And so I think for whatever reason, the technique by which I teach, because it's so simple and it's so specifically actionable, when people read my books or they listen to me in an audio or they see me on a TV show, there's something that I say that triggers them to act. And when they act, they get results, and then they tell their friends. So, I'm at a point now where, you know how this is. Any great business ultimately is built off of referrals. So, we've had 10 consecutive national best-selling books, and hopefully this will be our 11th. But it's because people know that what I do, it really helps them. So, I think we've been really blessed that I don't know. I just feel really fortunate that whatever it is I'm doing, it's working for people. And then I would just say, Joe, I think the second secret to my success of why my programs work is I really listen to my readers. Every book has pretty much been now, in certainly the last 5, 6, 7 years, has been a result of listening to my readers, answering their questions, hearing from them what hurts, and simply working to try to help them get rid of the pain. And also seeing which of my advice they take. So, the beauty of where I am today is that having done this for 20 years, I can tell when my advice is working, and I can tell when certain things are not working. One of the privileges I had being in the business of being a financial advisor is I had almost a decade to see what works in the real world. I'm not just a journalist out there that's doing a Google search and putting information in a book and then talking about it. I actually know what works. I've seen what people will do and what they won't do. And so I think having that real-world experience has put me at least in a fortunate position to share that information with people, and then they go and use it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and the way you write is, it's simple, it's understandable. You're just great at teaching people how to be financially literate, and I think that's huge. And so you have some great tools that are available on your website. People buy your book or not, you've got some great resources. You got free resources that are awesome. I want you to be able to give people information out about that in a moment. What I do want is couple things I want to ask you about. One, I've heard many times from financial people that there's tax advantages to being in debt. Are there any benefits that are really worth talking about of being in debt? Or, right now with the current economy, with the current state of affairs, your whole thing is no debt, no matter what. Is there anything that would make sense for maintaining debt?
Well, look, I'm a businessman. I'm a realist. The real world is that you get a tax deduction on your mortgage. Right now, you can get a tax deduction on the interest on your first $1 million, and if you get a home equity loan, you get a tax deduction on $1.1 million worth of debt. And so, what's really subsidized our housing market and what has made our housing market what it is today is that the government subsidizes home purchases by giving us a tax deduction. Now, that may actually change. In fact, there's a lot of serious talk about the tax deduction on home mortgages being reduced to $500,000. But, break this back to the average person at home. I get asked this question all the time. My accountant says to me that I should have a mortgage because I get a tax deduction. And I always say, is your accountant rich? Because I've rarely met very many accountants that are rich.
Right.
And especially when I say this from stage, people crack up. But, this idea that we should carry debt so that we can then get a tax deduction, it's just totally flawed. It makes zero sense. It's like, I should spend $3,000 a month so that I can get a tax deduction on part of that debt. Well, wouldn't it be better to just not have the debt and then figure out other ways to get tax deductions? Like you could give money to charity.
Right.
So, I think that the idea that you should carry debt in an effort to get a tax deduction is just absurd. And it's what people have been trained to believe to justify their debt and rationalize their debt. It's been a great reason. It certainly may, it is an argument for buying a home. I'm a big believer that, look, if you're going to spend $2,000 a month on rent, when you could have a $2,000 mortgage payment and get a tax deduction, you're going to come out ahead by having a home. And most importantly, you're building an asset. You can justify it because you're getting a tax deduction. But you shouldn't desire to keep the debt in an effort to keep the tax deduction. You'd just be better off to not have the debt and then, not worry about the tax deduction. You can always go fund your 401k plan or your SEP IRA and get a tax deduction that way.
Well, there you go. You answered the question. So, and then the other thing I want to ask you, financial tips that are not in the book. Any that you can rattle off?
Financial tips that are not in the book?
Yep.
Yeah, let me tell you what I'm doing today for myself. And again, this is where things change. You go back 5-6 years ago, I was just starting to talk about exchange-traded mutual funds, ETFs. I think if you go back to Smart Women Finish Rich, I was probably one of the first people ever to write about ETFs. There was only about 50 of them when I first wrote about them, and today there are thousands of them. It's the biggest growing part of the investment industry in the whole world. Today, I invest exclusively in ETFs. So, for somebody who's listening and if they don't know what an ETF is, exchange-traded mutual funds, it's the lowest cost way to buy into different indexes in the stock market. If a mutual fund costs 1.5%, let's say on average, the cost of an ETF could be as low as 0.15, 1/10 the cost of an actively managed mutual fund. And so today, my entire portfolio, other than individual stocks, is made up of ETFs. And I think if you're listening today, I really believe that ETFs are just a great way to build a portfolio. But that's being technical. Again, if I go back to, basic, simple stuff, I'll go back to, are you paying yourself first? Whenever you're listening to this audio, whether it's 2011, some people listen to this audio in 2012 or 2013 or 14 or 15, it's going to go back to the basic premise, which is, first thing is, are you paying yourself first? If you've got income coming in, the first person who's has to be paid is you. So are you making sure that at least, for every dollar that you earn, at least 10 cents of that dollar is coming off the top to pay yourself first? And if you want to be wealthy, it needs to be more than 10 cents. It needs to be 20 to 30 cents. If you want to be really rich, the faster you pay yourself first, the faster you become really rich.
Yep. Well, there you go. And I will say, your books, they're not long, monstrous books. They're short. They're condensed. They're to the point. The processes that you have in them can take, in some cases, 10 minutes to totally get you clear on where you're at financially. So people certainly are going to do themselves a huge service and get some incredible insight and an education by investing in all your books. And, of course, your newest one, Debt Free for Life, is the subject of this conversation. Now, you have a super cool tool online, which is called DebtWise.com, and you also have, some great stuff on your Finish Rich site. So first, let's talk about DebtWise and what it is and who should look at it and how's it work and all that, and then any other awesome tools that you make available to people.
Yeah, you bet. Well, I almost feel like I want to have a drum roll right now, but
bam.
I hate to do this all the way, at the end of our call, but I know we've left the best for last. So I've got a new tool out called DebtWise. I've created it with Equifax. And really, what happened is that about a year ago, there was a tool that I saw online that had just been launched that took what I had been teaching for nearly 10 years, my Dolf System, which we talked about earlier. They had created an online tool that takes Dolf and makes it completely automated. And so I'm sitting in my office, and I see this banner ad pop up, and I click on it, and I'm like, oh, my God, this is, Joe, this is what I've been teaching for a decade, only it's better, because what I've taught, you have to do the math yourself. You have to find all your debt, you have to calculate, you have to put it on a piece of paper, and you have to do the math. Now, my system might take you, could take you an hour to do that, to go pull all your credit card files and, pull your mortgage statement and write it all out. It's still really easy, but it's manual, and then you got to update it yourself every month. Well, DebtWise, what DebtWise does is it does it all for you in seconds. So what happens with DebtWise, when you go into DebtWise.com, and now you'll see that on the face of this this product, because I've helped them, I've added a whole bunch of additional tools now, so that when you go into DebtWise, it's like I'm your personal, coach there, helping you get yourself out of debt. When you go into DebtWise, DebtWise is powered by Equifax, and Equifax is one of the largest credit bureaus in America. They're over a 100-year-old company. They're publicly traded, and they have all the information on everyone. So, they're the ones who have your credit report. So when you put your information into DebtWise and you put in Joe Polish and you fill it out, in seconds all your debt will pop up, and it will list all of your debt. And it does exactly what I've taught for all these years, only it's automatic. So it's all there. So it instantly pulls all your credit files, pulls your credit cards, pulls your mortgage statements. If anything's missing that they don't have, you can add it. And then it tells you what order, shows you how to create the order in which to pay your debt off. And then it automatically calculates it for you. So it's a debt dashboard that shows you in seconds, here's how much debt you have, here's the day you're going to be free of debt, and then you can run all kinds of projections where, well, if I add a little extra money towards my debt, how much faster can I have debt freedom? And we actually have a tool on there called Debt Freedom Day. So you can, in seconds again, have all your debt lined up, know which debt to pay off first, And then every time you pay your debt off the next month, because Equifax gets your credit information from the banks and the lending institutions, the credit card companies, it updates it for you, and it shows you if you're on track for your debt reduction plan or if you're off track. So it's like having your own coach with all your information totally secure that you can do from the safety of your home or anywhere for that matter, online, your own online tool to help you pay your debt down faster. And the book actually comes with a free monthly membership, and then there's a monthly fee. Right now it's $14.95 a month. You can try it for 1 month for free. The code is in the book in Debt Free for Life. People can go and try it. They can also go to our website, finishfirst.com, or they can go to debtwise.com directly to check it out. But it is, I will tell you, there's nothing like this. There's nothing like this anywhere. It's a completely revolutionary tool. There are other websites where you can put the information in yourself, but this is the only tool that exists today that automatically does it for you. So it's the first, in my opinion, the first program that can help you through the process of automatically paying down your debt and automatically updating your debt reduction. It's just, I've never been more excited about a tool. So I've never put my face on a product like this. And, I've been involved in this product and the programming that's gone into it now for about a year. We've shot all these videos where I'm there to coach you through the process. And we're touring America right now. We've got a DebtWise bus, and we just shot commercials. So very excited to have this tool now for people to help themselves get out of debt, because so often people don't know where to turn. They look at debt settlement companies or loan consolidators. I think before you look at anyone else to help you pay off your debt, you should try to do it yourself, and you can use debtwise.com to do that.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, you also have others. I mean, you've really made it a mission to make this whole subject of becoming debt-free for life, a very doable thing. So you've got iPhone apps that are now out, and you've got videos, and you've got other tools online. So any other David Bach-related tools and resources that our listeners should be made aware of, and then we'll let them start the whole process of becoming debt-free for life.
Well, I love that. Listen, what I'd love people to do is become a part of our community, and you can do that in multiple ways. You can go to finishfirst.com, and right at the top of our website, you can simply join our community. We've got a program started called Automatic Millionaire International, which is being launched in 2011. We're going to have a series of events and programs throughout the year around my Automatic Millionaire program, so I invite people to check that out on our website on finishfirst.com. It's going to be one of the most comprehensive programs that I've ever created around wealth building and debt reduction, and so I'm so excited to get this program off the ground in January. And then additionally on finishfirst.com with Equifax, we've created a series of products, not just debt reduction, but everything from your credit score to identity theft, different programs that can help you in these different areas. So your credit score, which, by the way, your credit score is included in DebtWise. So if you sign up for DebtWise, you get a credit score. You get 4 credit scores with that. But we've got an identity theft product now for people. Really important to protect your identity. That's on finishfirst.com. And so you can check that all out on the website, and then our Facebook site, facebook.com /David Bach. We're up. I try to get on that. I try to actually get on that site myself at least once a day. And so we've got a real active community there. And, I don't know when people will be listening to this audio, but, whenever you are, I invite you to either visit us in either one of those places, finishfirst.com or on facebook.com /David Bach.
Awesome. Well, David, as always, it is always a pleasure to interview you, to talk with you, and to share your knowledge with my clients, to have something that all of your clients listen to and all of your readers. And you're a very prolific guy. I mean, you've written a lot of books. You've really been able to focus. And you've built a real success for yourself. And so a lot of what you've done has really been, your ability to prioritize and to really focus on achievement. So any famous last words about just what it takes to go from one area and improve yourself? So more like success advice, achievement advice, and the ability to prioritize and focus, because you are a living example of someone that does it. And so any words of encouragement for people out there that, probably are a lot less stuck now that they've listened to this conversation. But any tips on just becoming more successful in life?
Wow, that's such a big question. Here's how. There's so many ways I could answer, but I'll answer with something that I can take credit for. And ironically, this is actually at the very end of Debt Free for Life, but it's something that really has always stuck with me. And, sometimes you hear something and it's one of those moments that changes your whole life. So what I'm about to share with you, this is not coming from me, this is coming from Tom Hanks. So Tom Hanks, obviously the very, very famous and successful actor, who's from the Bay Area in California. And I'm from the Bay Area. And I'll never forget this. I was driving in my car, and Tom Hanks was being interviewed, and he was being asked about, what it feels like to win, I think it was all these Academy Awards or Oscars. And he said, the biggest thing is, this is in the interview, this is on a radio interview, so the biggest thing is that there were a lot of people who didn't believe I could do what I dreamed about doing. He wanted to be an actor since high school. And he said, there were just a lot of people who thought I was crazy. They didn't believe I could do what I wanted to do. And he said, I decided to bet on myself, and I won. And he said the greatest thrill has been that I chose to bet on myself and I won. And I'll never forget hearing that. And I think when I look at my own life, once you're successful, everybody thinks you're a genius. But I can tell you that when I got started, Joe, when I was a guy wanting to write a book, Smart Women Finish Rich, and go out and educate 1 million women, people thought I was an idiot.
Yeah.
So, all along the journey of my life, there have been naysayers. And there have been people who have told me why what I want to do isn't possible, or shouldn't be done, or why I'm not the person to do it. And yet I've constantly bet on myself to win. And I haven't given up. And so I would say to anybody who's listening that my greatest gift, if I could give it to anyone, is this. Figure out what you really want to do and bet on yourself to win. Don't give up. Don't listen to the naysayers. Don't listen to the dream stealers. If you've got something inside of you that you feel deeply needs to come out, and it doesn't have to be anything related to money, but there's a dream inside of you that you feel that you were put here to do. It could be something simple, like I've got people go, my dream is to go take guitar lessons. I don't know what it is. All I know is you deserve to go for it. You deserve to bet on yourself to win, and I just think that's it. It's to go for your dreams. It's to people are always betting on others. Bet on yourself.
I love it. I love it. What a great way to end an awesome conversation. So, David, thank you to all of the listeners. Get a copy of Debt Free for Life. I've read a lot of David's books. I know him personally. I've interviewed him. You've actually spoke at one of my events before, and there's so many takeaways that I got. So this has put me on a whole new course. And frankly, because of following your advice, I really have very little debt in my life. I haven't had credit card debt in 15 years. Although I use credit cards, I pay them off every month. So it's because of this sort of advice in getting on this path. And so, the biggest thing is really where this is going to take you. And so check out debtwise.com, and love to hear everyone's success stories. Join David's community. I can assure you it will change your life if you take it on and you embrace it. So to all of the listeners, thanks for taking the time to listen. And David, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Joe, thank you. It is always a pleasure. You are just awesome, and I always enjoy doing interviews with you. So I really appreciate you taking the time to do this and squeezing it into your schedule. And I'm thrilled to be on this call with you and thrilled to do this interview. So thank you so much. It's been fun.
Thank you. You're welcome. Take care, everyone.
Hello, this is Joe Polish. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to this interview. I hope you found it very useful. Please give me your feedback on all of the interviews that you listen to. I'd love to hear your feedback so we can always deliver a great program for you. Our website is www.joepolish.com, and we also have a Joe Polish Recommends section, so you can take a lot of the ideas and concepts that you hear on my Genius Network interview series and apply them to your business and find vendors and resources. You can go to joepolish.com to find that information and click on the Joe Polish Recommends section. And also, if you would like to find out about more interviews and invest in more useful Genius Network series interviews, go to www.geniusnetwork.com. Thanks, and eat your competition alive.